It is a pleasure to welcome Natalie Liu to the show today. And Natalie has a book. You've got a couple different books out, but the one I've got is The Joy of Saying No. And you're speaking my language right off the bat. If that's all I know of you, then we're going to get along just fine. Because I've always had the belief, Natalie, that no is a complete sentence in and of itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So welcome to the show, Natalie.
Oh, thank you for having me, Corey.
So I'm curious, just from the introduction I've had of you, and I'm excited to have the audience to get the introduction to you too. Of how did you wind up where this message is coming out now for you, and kind of being a lot more refined? Because I know this isn't just something of my hunch is that you didn't just wake up one day. So you know what? Let's talk about the whole process of saying no. I mean, so how did this come about with your journey?
So I'm 45 now, but in my 20s, really up into my late 20s, I had terrible taste in romantic relationships. I prided myself on being a good girl, and that meant trying to avoid conflict, overperforming at work, doing what my family wanted and expected, even when it meant going against myself and causing harm. And I found myself grappling with an immune system disease called sarcoidosis I think I was diagnosed with it when I was 26, I think it was. And so it was one of these mystery immune system diseases where your immune system effectively turns against you, starts damaging, healthy organs. And probably about 18 or so months into it, after doing a year-long course of steroids, I was told that basically the treatment hadn't worked. And it was at that point, my life was a hot mess, in many respects at that point. Like outside looking in, people would be like, oh, well, she's cool and she's attractive and she's got a good job and she's doing really well in that job.
Right.
But I hated myself. And as I said, I've been involved with a number of emotionally unavailable men, but I'd also been in some abusive relationships. And it occurred to me that I didn't really like myself very much, and that I had been so caught up in chasing romantic love and meeting everybody else's expectations that when doctors had said, yeah, just go on these steroids, do this, do that, I just obeyed. And here I was, and they were telling me that, I had a pretty poor prognosis with this illness. And I was like, no, I'm not going on steroids for life. I'm going to explore all other options. And that was August 2005. And that was a big turning point in my life, because I became really aware of how the relationship I had with myself and with my family, just with life in and of itself, really had something to do with why my life was so miserable. And when I started to create boundaries, which was very unfamiliar territory. So for me, it was just like, it was not just about saying no, but it was also about just being clearer about who I was and what didn't work for me. Life started to turn around very quickly. I was declared in remission within 8 months of that shocking prognosis. Yeah. I met my now husband. I went on to have kids. A lot of people would look at that and go, that's a happy ending, Natalie. It sounds to me like you had this horrible illness. You thought you were going to die because that's what they were telling you was going to happen. You instead were in remission. You met your now husband and had kids, lived happily ever after. And lots of good things have happened. But actually, what I realized was that this was just the beginning of me having to figure out this whole boundaries thing. Because, you get into a relationship and it can be very easy, when you're in a relationship and then you go on to be married, to sometimes lose sight of your own needs because you're trying to be a good partner, a good spouse, a good wife, good husband, good something. But then there's motherhood, and then there's working for yourself, and there's dealing with your family, and basically it's dealing with life. And time again, what I found is different things were really forcing me to confront my relationship with no, my relationship with boundaries, and forcing me to be more honest about who I was, be more honest about my needs, expectations, desires, feelings, and opinions. And so I talk about having been on this recovering people pleaser journey really for 17 and a half years now, I think it is. And in the joy of saying no, I share everything I've learned from being on that journey, because I think a lot of us think that the answer to everything is to tick the boxes of success. So be in a relationship, or get married, or have kids, or get the big job or the money. And we think that that is the solution, like that says that we must be okay. But what we will find is that we can have all of those things, or some of those things, and we're still going to have to confront this people pleasing within us.
Right. So that's like this element of, because I've always thought that the world proposes this paint by numbers mantra, right?
Yes.
That if I follow this and fill it in right, and I go through this hoop and I fill it in right, I'll have this beautiful picture. And the insidious thing of that is the beautiful picture is what other people perceive, but it's not what I experience, right?
Yes. I love that you're saying this, because it's funny. I like the paint by numbers metaphor as well. And it's funny. We're clearly kindred spirits, and there is this sense of if you tick the societal boxes of what society has said makes a good person and what makes you happy and successful, then what's your problem? Like, you're fine.
Right. Yeah. What are you complaining about?
Yeah, what are you complaining about? And we all know that's just not true. And I think that as humans, we find it so confusing and sometimes very painful when we appear to have the things that people said would make us happy. And yet we don't feel that way. There are many people who are not passionately married. Yeah. There are people who have been married to the wrong person, who have been through divorce. Most of the time, those people did not go into that marriage planning for it to be a divorce. Yeah. I say most of the time because, there are some people who they knew where it was headed, but they thought it was going to, lead to some big payoff.
Yeah, marriage will change
it. But for the majority of people, majority of people, that's not where they thought they would be. But they thought that getting somebody and getting married was going to create this magical feeling inside them, or they thought that once they were married, that whatever problems they'd had in the relationship would just poof, magically disappear and everything would be okay. And people feel confused by that, because it's like, well, hold on a second. I fought so hard to be in a relationship and then to be married. So why do I feel so lost or sad or angry, or why aren't I in love anymore? Or why am I thinking about divorce? And that's because this society, as humans, we're obsessed with good versus bad, what it means to be successful. And the fact of the matter is that if you climb up somebody else's ladder of success, or you step into somebody else's mold of what it means to be good or to be happy or to be successful, it's not your mold, it's not your ladder, it's not your way, it's not your journey. And we have been taught, socialized and conditioned to follow the herd. A lot of people think that being a good person means doing what your family told you made you a good person. And so for a lot of people, they think, oh, well, that means being a good person means having a partner and being married. Basically having a really good job, having children. But that's not for everybody. It's for lots of people, but it's not for everybody. There's lots of people that it's not for.
So I want to get into this idea with you of the people pleaser that you're alluding to, right? That it is, because there is this component, I think, of us as humans that we are all in the way I frame this, Natalie, is we are all in the development of trying to become ourselves within context of a relationship too. Right. And
amen.
And going to one end or the other is not beneficial ever, typically, for the long run, for sure. Because I can hold on to myself to the exclusion of everybody else, and I'm just as alone as if I lose myself for the sake of a relationship. And so
yes,
if
amen,
you look at it, the way you frame this is under the auspices of a people pleaser. Because I know in your book, you even go through, there's different types of people pleasing, if you will. And I want to unpack that, if you would, on just because this is clearly, you and I are well versed in this journey. It sounds like so I'm intrigued by the way you have categorized this.
Yeah. So people pleasing is where we essentially deprioritize our needs, expectations, desires, feelings, and opinions to put everybody else's ahead of our own. And we do this by playing roles, taking on jobs, personas within our interpersonal relationships. And we do it to gain attention, affection, approval, love, and validation. And we also do it to avoid conflict, criticism, additional stress, disappointment, loss, and rejection. A lot of people misunderstand people pleasing. So they see it as this virtuous quality. Oh, I'm such a people pleaser.
Right.
I'm just such a people pleaser. And, I'm kind, I'm generous, I'm such a people pleaser. But then others are like, oh, a people pleaser means doormat. And okay, there are some times when it can be up at the extreme end. But the fact of the matter is, and this is something I talk about in the book, that if you're not a child right now, then you were raised during the age of obedience. And that is where the communicating, interacting, disciplining of children centered on making them as obedient and compliant as possible with authorities. So we've been socialized and conditioned into people pleasing, and we can have awareness that we're people pleasers, and then other times we're like, I kind of have a feeling I might be because I have an issue with saying no and boundaries, but I'm not really quite sure. And so what I felt was really helpful was I kept seeing these patterns in people pleasing, that some people's form of people pleasing had very, very clear drivers. And so those 5 styles of people pleasing are gooding, efforting, avoiding, saving, and suffering. And the names in and of themselves imply what that people pleasing involves: being and looking good, effort. So, being the best, giving 100%, perfectionism. I have to be seen to have done the most. Avoiding is using avoidance as a way to please others. So it's like, I will never do anything that will discomfort the other person. So for instance, within a marriage, that can be, oh, what do you want to do tonight? I like what you like. Never really voicing a difference, because it's like, oh, the way for me to be the perfect spouse is to go along with whatever they want. And then when they don't like the outcome of it, I can just blame them for it and be like, well, you wanted this, didn't you?
Very convenient. Yes.
Yeah, very convenient. And then there's saving. And this is for the helpers, fixers, rescuers, saviors of this world, who their way of being pleasing is, they can almost end up sometimes treating people like pet projects. I'll take you on, I'll try to fix you. My way of pleasing will be, mending you, helping. They're all, they'll step in and they're the one to be super responsible in a situation, but they'll martyr themselves. And a part of them is trying to save others in a way to also save themselves. They've seen it as their job within the family to be pleasing by sacrificing themselves and being the one who always steps in. And then suffering, it's almost like, well, I bleed for you, so I'll suffer, and suffering makes me a really good person. So the more I suffer, the better I am. Right. And we'll have we can find that we have dabbled in a few of these, but there tends to be one, maybe two in particular that jump out. Like, I am an efforter. It's not that I've not dabbled in some of the others, but I have been about effort. And so that's how I got myself into trouble previously, for instance, with romantic relationships, where it was like, well, I've been a good girl. I've been a good girlfriend. I've put in this effort. I've suffered. I've avoided boundaries. I am giving this my best and I'm trying my hardest. So why aren't I getting what I want? And I think that, given the messages that we have received around romantic relationships and marriage, it's very easy to slip into people pleasing within a marriage if you're not too careful, because it's like, oh, like being a good wife or being a good husband, being a good spouse, it means like subjugating myself and not having any needs. And it's like, no, that is not the case at all.
So,
and, also,
I was going to say, I want to just distinguish a couple of things just because I think I'm tracking with you, but to anybody that might be listening to this, and this is a little bit of a foreign concept, or because we can have a tendency, Natalie, I know you can agree with me on this. I'm assuming we can have a tendency of, I hear what I want to hear that goes in with the story that I tell myself. Right. So, but what we're talking about here is not, your message is not to the extreme of, this is just demanding my way, getting my way.
Absolutely not.
Forget the consequences. And it's this continuum, right? Of just like, I can be kind and considerate and even pleasing to people without letting go of myself. That's the point, is I can do it to where I'm not doing something to get something. I'm doing something to be engaged with me and my situation and my relationship.
Amen. And I think that this is a really important point, because I think as soon as we start having a conversation about no and boundaries, that people, particularly when it comes to romantic relationships, can be quite defensive about that, because they think that unconditional love is not, for instance, having any boundaries and not saying no. Actually, that's not. Unconditional love is not, I will love you no matter what you do to me. It is, I will love you through all seasons and conditions. And here is how you differentiate people pleasing from showing up in your relationship as your authentic self and wanting to be there for yourself and for your partner. There are people who do things for their partner in their romantic relationships, in their marriage. I speak specifically to marriage. There are people who do things in their marriage because that's what they want to do. They are aware of their needs. They are aware of who they are. They're not doing it to get something in return. They're not doing it because they're afraid of what will happen if they don't. When they recognize that something isn't quite a fit, that they need to adjust in some way, they can and they will. And they are in that relationship with that person. There's a mutual love, care, trust, and respect in that marriage. We know it's people pleasing when we actually do those same things. So we do stuff in the marriage, but we do it because we're afraid that if we don't do it, they're going to tell us to get the frick out. We do it because we are trying to cover up feelings of low self-worth. We do it because we see it as our job. It's like, it's my job to do this. And the thing is that once we start saying, oh, this is my job, this is what a good whatever does, we're hiding actually from intimacy and vulnerability. And the mistake that a lot of people make is seeing people pleasing as this really noble thing that they're doing. And I'm not saying that it makes you a bad person if you're a people pleaser, because hello, I'm a recovering one myself, and we're all dealing with it to some degree. What I am saying is that people pleasing is like a mask or a costume. You're hiding behind a role. You're hiding behind pleasing. You're hiding around like, oh, I do this for you, and I'm just doing it for you because I want to please you. But you're not acknowledging the hidden agenda behind that. You're not acknowledging the why. And so it is okay to want to please your partner, but recognize where you're doing that just because it's the byproduct of the relationship that you're in and how you each show up for each other, and where your why is about, oh, I have to do this because I'm repeating the patterns of my parents, or I have to do it because I'm afraid they're going to abandon me, or there's going to be an argument, because that's people pleasing.
Right. No, this is so valuable because it's recognizing, you're talking about a hidden agenda. I use the word covert, right? If I'm doing something and there's a covert motivation within it, that's where it starts to become precarious and the slippery slope, right? Because that's something else I'm trying to control or avoid or provide without actually me being the one doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that sometimes we have some level of awareness that we have, as you call it, this covert agenda, where it's like, I'm trying to avoid conflict. I'm afraid that they're going to this. But sometimes it's that we're so habituated in playing out the pattern of being in this role because it's what we did when we were a kid, within whatever environment that we grew up in. And it's maybe the thing that we have got praise for, or that we've just got used to doing, that it's not necessarily that we have this conscious or even inadvertent agenda about our partner. It's just that we're on autopilot and we're not really showing up. We're just repeating patterns. And either way, it's still a problem, because the only reason why you're doing that stuff is because there's a part of you on some level that has learned to be afraid of having boundaries and being your authentic self. An example of this is, I hear from people who they have been in a marriage, for instance, or being close to getting married, and the person has turned around and said, I just don't feel like I know you. And they are so confused about why this person is saying this. But the reason why their spouse or their fiance is saying this is because this person is performing at being a good partner, right? And so their fiance or their spouse is never really sure that what they're saying is actually what they mean, because it seems like this person is never really letting them in, that they're always going along with things. And a lot of people think, who wouldn't want somebody who's going to be whatever you want them to be? Somebody who wants actual intimacy and vulnerability in their relationships and marriage. That's exactly. Somebody else who wants you to be a yes person and to have you under the thumb, it'd be very happy for you to do that.
Right.
But for somebody who wants to feel safe and secure in their relationship and to foster genuine intimacy, they're not going to want to marry somebody who's going to basically be whatever they want them to be instead of being themselves.
Yeah, when we surround ourselves with yes people, like you're describing, or just the go along to get along, or the pleaser to the extreme, there's no pushback. And life is best when there's some pushback. We don't like that fact, I think, because that means there is conflict. But it's where we get better. It's where we are, we evolve, we grow, we mature, we develop better character. And that's what creates the energy of a relationship that can really be sustainable over the long haul.
Absolutely. There's a lot of people who say, I've never had an argument, never had a disagreement with my spouse. And I always say, that's not a badge of honor. And there are people
don't go touting that.
Yeah, that's a badge of a problem. And one of the things that I say is that conflict, so that willingness to run the possibility, the risk of conflict, is a form of intimacy. I'm not talking about conflict for conflict's sake, right? I'm talking about that willingness that when the rubber hits the road and you need to express a difference of some sort, that you need to basically show yourself in some way that might not fit the general expectation, that you're willing to go there. A lot of people will say, the reason why I didn't tell my spouse about what I was thinking or what I was feeling is because I didn't want to hurt their feelings. But from the moment that you start to avoid saying that stuff, you cut yourself off from intimacy. And that is more of a problem than if you just turn around and said the thing. And I recognize it is, given how we're socialized and conditioned, I know it is not easy for us to do that. Some of us have seen things in our parents' marriages, for instance, that it's like, it's no wonder that we're terrified of conflict. My mom and my stepdad, it felt like I was living with Ike and Tina, sometimes. So it is no wonder. But conflict is a critical part. It's a critical component of intimacy. And if you say, I've never had an argument with my spouse, listen, nobody agrees with somebody all the time. Somebody is lying, right? So somebody is getting their way at the expense of the other. Somebody is pretending that everything is always the same, that they never have any difference. And you're not getting down to the real the intimacy of the relationship.
Right. That's the relationship in name only. That's all that is.
There you go. Yeah.
Right? We're playing parts, and it's in name only. I'm not really involved. So,
yeah.
Okay.
And people are terrified of conflict because they see it as, some people are like, oh my gosh, conflict means that's the end of the relationship. Until you have said no, you've expressed limits, you've expressed, your boundaries, as in your boundaries are who you are as a person. So it's not just about no, it's about yes. Until you're truly showing them who you are and you're running the risk of conflict, you do not know this person as well as you think. Right. And there are people who can be married for a long time. I talk about the 5 stages of relationships, and I talk about how intimacy is what determines where you are in a relationship, not a title. And there are people who've been together for like decades, and they have the level of intimacy of people who are in that first stages of a relationship, because they never go any deeper than that.
That's so good. So, Natalie, before we wrap up this segment, I want how can people find your work, because it's valuable. Couldn't recommend it more. So, tell people how they find you.
So my website is natalielue.com. So Natalie, then LUE.com. I also have like my podcast, which is the Baggage Reclaim Sessions, which is on all podcast players. And I have nearly a couple of thousand articles at baggagereclaim.com as well. Social media wise, the best place to get a hold of me is on Instagram, where I'm at NatLue, NATLUE.
Perfect. Well, Natalie, thank you so much for the work, and from one recovering pleaser to another. This is incredibly valuable. So thank you.
Thank you, Corey.